Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mug Up with BB&C podcast. My name is Anise, and with me is Kayla.
Hey, everyone.
In today's episode, we'll be sitting down with Deenaalee, Chase Hodgdon, and Ruth Miller, co-directors of Smokehouse Collective. Hi, welcome.
Yaxlidu, thank you for having us.
Yeah, Adet, thank you so much.
Well, before we get started, I'll just have you both introduce yourselves.
Yeah, yaxlidu everyone. Shivak isinch ijit u den enakanaga shashkun kanash chachayangas nenish itte. Shtiznaq Heather Kendall Miller shumktach u Lloyd Miller stukta u chiknek yetelhenu bagut yaxli etsette. My name is Ruth Shivak Isen Miller. I am the daughter of Heather Kendall Miller and Lloyd Miller, and the granddaughter of Jack Ferguson and Ruth Peterson, and Arthur Miller and Hope Ruth Simon. And I am currently calling in from Lenape lands here in New York City, but I was born and raised in Deenaalee homelands in Rayakak and Anchorage, though my family is from Kijik village on Lake Clark. My grandma then went down to Dillingham. Well, she was born in Ekuk and then lived in Dillingham most of her life. And that's our beautiful connection to the Bay. I currently serve alongside Deenaalee as co-director of the Smokehouse Collective, and I'm so happy to get this chance to visit with you all and share about some of the work that we hope to be doing.
Yeah, and Adet waka Deenaalee Chase Hodgdon's Eje Melinda Chasing on David Hodgdon's to get their Nicheg South Naknek Yithistan Chogyong Listo. Hi everybody, my name is Deenaalee Chase Hodgdon. On my maternal side, I am the daughter of Melinda Chase from the village of Githernachag, otherwise known as the mouth of the Long Long River, which refers to the Anvik River. Anvik is a small Degaton village on the banks of the Anvik and the Yukon River. And on my father's side, I am from South Naknek, descended from Katmai and Lake Iliamna peoples. And my father is David Hodgdon. My grandmother is the late Nona Hodgdon. Her maiden name was Ansaganok. And I currently live and work here on Chogyong lands in Dillingham, Alaska, co-directors with Ruth Miller for the Smokehouse Collective. And am also very thankful to be able to have this conversation with BB&C and with both of you, and discuss the things that are near and dear to our hearts in Bristol Bay, which is largely the salmon and our traditional foods. Koyana.
Let's talk about the Smokehouse Collective. What is the Smokehouse Collective and what inspired you guys to start it?
Well, the Smokehouse Collective, it's many things. But most directly, it is a place to gather, a place where we are trying to bring together the resources and infrastructure that we need in today's day and age to fulfill the needs of our communities for food sovereignty and food security, as well as the practicing revitalization and remembrance of our traditional values and skills, such as cutting fish, moose hide tanning, language work, yulak dancing, and so on and so forth.
The Smokehouse Collective was really born out of a need from not just our people, but our relatives along the interior of Alaska, our relatives all across Alaska that are facing not only limitations to our access of subsistence foods from climate change, but also, governance structures that prevent us from being able to practice our cultural ways. We each worked for many, many years in different branches of food sovereignty and climate justice, environmental justice. I always love sharing about how my very first job was in Dillingham for United Tribes of Bristol Bay, working against Pebble Mine when I was 15. I worked out in that blue Connex in the harbor. And the story that each of us, continuously witnessed amongst our peoples was this determination to preserve and practice our life ways, but also these constant challenges as not just weather patterns are changing, but administrations also change and impact our ability to access, our millennia old ways of life and our constant, infinite relationships to our non-human relatives, including our salmon. And so we decided to work within community to create, as Deenaalee said, a traditional food hub, a network, a community that was particularly dedicated to preserving our ways of life, but also, establishing kind of a mutual aid network to make sure that our native peoples have strong nation to nation relationships, village to village relationships with one another, so that as we face increasing scarcity of our fish, increasing unpredictability, we're able to support one another and build our Indigenous sovereignty through times of crisis.
Wow, that's beautiful. I love how you guys saw a need and then did something about it. And you guys actually have the background to make that dream a reality. And here you guys are with the Smokehouse Collective. It's super cool. Can you explain how your food network operates?
We're still in the beginning stages of building out the network. And I think what's important to ground this conversation in is that we're really not doing anything new necessarily. We're using traditional values of, reciprocity and sharing and exchange, and really just bringing that to the forefront of the conversation in a way that is supported by many different funding streams and partnerships that help to make a large scale network possible. So what I mean by that is, our aunties and our uncles have always traded, have always said, and always bartered, and have said, hey, do you have any berries? I have some fish. Can you send some berries to me from, say, Fairbanks down to Dillingham, and I'll send you some fish in exchange for it. So those are the relationships that are already in place that we're just amplifying and saying, okay, well, we know that our relations, as I mentioned in my introduction, like I'm a child of both the Yukon River and Bristol Bay. My relations on the Yukon, up and down the river from the headwaters all the way up into Canada, do not have fish right now. And so we're saying, all right, we have an abundance of salmon, luckily, that are still coming back, largely the sockeye, the reds. And so how can we send fish up to the Yukon and have people come down here to fish with us? Because we know that fishing is not just taking a fish out of your freezer. It's so much more than that. It's, mending that net pre-season, putting the net in the water, being able to bring that back and process it in the ways that we were taught in our families, and canning it, putting it in the smokehouse, and then being able to share it. And so we're trying to build a network that isn't just about the one-to-one exchange, which oftentimes happens in the capitalist economy of, okay, I'm going to exchange this set amount of dollars for this, bag of flour. We don't just want to do that. We want to say our relationships to things like our salmon, our relatives, like our salmon and our berries, it's so much more than that. And how can we amplify the relationships around it with one another in our human to human connection?
As far as where you see the Smokehouse Collective going, so you're kind of more or so trying to help people make those connections?
What Deenaalee said really well is that it's about tending to our relationships that have been thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. For instance, in the year that we were first building the Smokehouse Collective as this kind of scalable idea, we really wanted to invest in communities to help them become food sovereign. So not just food secure, but food sovereign, so that we were able to maintain our ways of life, our access to hunting and fishing rights, and are able to, harvest in tandem with what our relatives need. But the year that we began really kind of like investing energy into this project was the same year as devastating Typhoon Merbok destroyed villages up and down the western coast of Alaska. And that spring, FEMA and the Red Cross, they were nowhere to be found. They, these governmental structures and these, kind of larger aid-based nonprofits didn't understand our communities, didn't understand our needs. They were not able to answer, the needs of our people facing the acute realities of the climate crisis and their weather events that we can only see, happening more and more. And so as people were losing their boats and their chest freezers and their stores of food that they had put away, their tools, we realized that, yeah, we as Native people understand the needs of Native communities. And it was our responsibility as good relatives to one another to think about what it means to um, redistribute our abundance from regions that are, wealthy in salmon runs or wealthy in moose or wealthy in berries. How do we be good relatives in sharing that? But as Deenaalee said, it's not just about, sending fish. If we're not able to maintain our relationships with the fish, then we lose who we are as Native people. And so it became very clear to us very quickly that we needed to be creating a home that could welcome our relatives, that could welcome folks from other communities to be sovereign in their own life ways and their own fishing ways. And, this past summer when we hosted our first fish camp, some of the teenagers and young people that joined us from the Yukon River and from Yukon communities, it was their first year learning how to put up fish, how to cut fish, because for their coming of age, the past 5 years, fishing has been closed. And so it was the first time that they were learning how to carry on their traditions and speaking their language with their grandparents who attended as well. So it's not just about redistributing food for the sake of food. It's about what does the food mean to us as Native people and how do we preserve that through crisis.
Why are community-led food efforts so important when dealing with food shortages or environmental issues?
Yeah, well, like we just said in that example, and maybe that's, maybe a response that's better used to address this question. Nothing about us without us, right? Other folks from outside our communities, from cities, even out of state, don't understand our unique needs and our millennia-old relationships and unique knowledges and understandings of our lands and of our non-human relatives. So they will not be the ones to bring solutions to problems of shortage that they caused. We as Native people across Alaska have faced not just, colonization, but now are facing, climate crisis, which was not caused by our communities, but caused by extractive capitalism. And so we know that the solutions will not come from the same source as the problems did. We know that we need to be strong as communities, as families, in order to build solutions that are resilient, that are adaptive, and that will see ourselves through these next years, if not decades or centuries of crisis. We want to be sure that, whatever comes, our languages, our dances, our life ways, our knowledge of the fish is what lasts, because that's the exact knowledge that we will need to ensure that our, descendants have access to the abundance that we've had. So when we look at the example, of Typhoon Merbok and the response there, it was very apparent that even shipping up food and rations to communities that are impacted by climate crisis is not the same thing as preserving their access to our traditional foods and all of the incredible health and spiritual and emotional benefits of what those relationships mean for us.
Yeah, and I'll kind of expand on that a little bit as well. Speaking to that last piece about around health, if we look at the ways that the nation of America grew and how Western expansion happened, it happened first and foremost through the accumulation of land, Indigenous land across Turtle Island, or what we call the Lower 48. And a lot of that land was then churned into large-scale agriculture and led to the decimation of Indigenous people's food resources. So thinking about the buffalo of the Great Plains, in the ways that corn, which was a staple food to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, has now been so commodified to the point that certain seeds have patents on them owned by large corporations such as Monsanto, which those seeds have been so genetically modified that they don't have any kind of nutritional value. We're so lucky here in Alaska that we still have a connection to largely to our subsistence foodways, even though we continue to fight for those rights every single day. I think oftentimes about Indigenous priority versus local priority. But, we do largely have lands that are still very, very healthy. And so we're at a critical tipping point when it comes to the expansion of America and the tipping point that we're at with climate, and then also where we're at in our relationship with our own foods, where it oftentimes makes me think about my grandfather, who craves salmon so much because his body knows that food is medicine, and it's the medicine that he in his late 80s needs right now in order to have a healthy mind, body, and spirit, to be able to participate as a full human being. We're trying to bring forward the fact that we don't have to be dependent on the 3-day supply of foods that are imported to Alaska. We fortunately and unfortunately have the ability to both harvest from our lands and grow food here in a small scale way that is enough to feed people, that doesn't extract from our lands and can use seeds that we exchange in relationship with other tribes that are good for the soil, that have that nutritional value that hasn't been stripped away, and that doesn't that ensures that the money that we are spending really stays in our community and upholds the values that continue to preserve a healthy way of life.
Awesome. You were kind of going this way earlier, but tell us a little bit about how the Smokehouse Collective is keeping the traditional harvesting and food practices alive, even in some of those communities that might not have the ability to.
Well, what we hope to continue doing, as we did last year, is to host a fish camp that is not, exclusive to one culture's way of putting up fish. Last year, we had representatives from a number of Yukon villages come join us in Bristol Bay and put up fish camp. And when we did so, we were, of course, teaching and supporting folks in learning about the species and the runs of fish that come to Bristol Bay, but we were also able to discuss the various ways that our communities from very different ecosystems and parts of Alaska put up fish. And one experience really stood out to me where we were talking about the different ways of splitting fish depending on what's happening with the weather, right? Because all of our regions across Alaska are having such unpredictable weather these days. The Yukon is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, whereas some areas are getting much rainier. It was a really beautiful experience to be able to exchange, okay, well, in this community, I think it was like we were talking about like Togiak style, they split fish in this way so that it dries faster, even though it's very rainy. And exchanging those particular kinds of knowledges across cultures felt so incredibly important to all of us, because it was the kinds of traditional ecological knowledge that our peoples have always traded. We've always been in deep relationship. We've always had vast trade networks. But I think often, and mostly in the last few decades, we've become very estranged. And so having the opportunity to bring folks down and say, hey, we'll provide the space, we'll provide the fish, we'll help share what we can, what we know about our region and our tribal lands and our fish here, but how can we support you in running fish camp the way that feels closest to home? How can we kind of meet each other and trade knowledges to create something that is more than just one community's way?
Yeah, and I think what's important too, because there's so much grief that is involved in this conversation when it comes to us not having fish on the Yukon River anymore. In not being able to have king salmon. And, Bristol Bay is also largely starting to experience that, not being able to have enough kings to go around for all the elders here. And so we're dealing with different levels of grief, different levels of intergenerational trauma. And each and every community, each and every family is going to experience that in different ways. And so what's important for us, as Ruth was saying, is like having this gathering space be a place to process and move through those layers and be able to talk about the different dynamics our peoples are facing across the state, of Alaska, and then try to also find, it can be a place to generate ideas and solutions. Like, we know that, Smokehouse Collective is just one idea, just one solution in the grand scheme of what it's going to take to continue to forward Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination, and really upholding our ways of life. It's just one aspect, but really I think where the collective piece comes in is that we have the opportunity through deep cultural exchange happening around our life ways to do that work in a way that maybe isn't necessarily happening all the time in policy spaces, because the place that we want to create is on the land and not in a square box in the city.
That's really inspiring that people are coming together when there is crisis, and we are seeing changes in climate, and people are able to exchange that knowledge. And it sounds like the Smokehouse Collective is really becoming a space for people to do that.
We certainly hope so, but none of it happens just us. It is, there's role for individuals, there's role for communities, there's role for villages and tribes. We've really loved partnering with my tribe, Łchav'aya, as well as villages up and down the Yukon, and bringing in more and more partners as we grow. So, like Deenaalee said, this is just one element of a much larger movement and solution.
We've talked a lot about the relationships that are happening here and how they're so important all across these different communities. Have you built any partnerships with local organizations or like fishermen, for example, that you guys want to talk about?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I'm living in Dillingham now, and but I wasn't raised in the region. I was raised in the wintertime in Fairbanks, and then would come out to South Naknek in the summer and go to Anvik in the summertime. There's many different dynamics that go into building community and building trust. And as a person that is really coming home to Bristol Bay, this is a question and a conversation that's very near and dear to my heart, because we can only build Smokehouse Collective, we can only build our relationships at the speed of trust. Like Ruth said, we were really fortunate to partner with Chogyong last year. They provided the wellness center here in Dillingham and the smokehouse to be able to host our relations from the Yukon to come down. And one of the families here also, have ties to the Yukon River too, and they were integral to helping to host their family. And so I think every day is an opportunity to build those little bits of connection and talk about Smokehouse Collective and bring people in and grow the conversation around, again, we're not doing anything new, but we might have different approaches to conversations regarding organizing and governance that we've been fortunate to be exposed to from our relationships with other tribes and other organizations across Turtle Island and the circumpolar north largely.
Well, and what's really beautiful, as Dee was saying, is that because the community around fishing is so vibrant and brings in so many people, and we come together over our food, we come together over our fish, because this work isn't new, as the Smokehouse Collective has gotten off the ground, we've also been met by so much enthusiasm and expertise. We have built really beautiful and continue to build really beautiful relationships with our fishermen and folks that, reach out to us even over our website or after reading about us or hearing about us even. And, even last summer, we realized that we really needed to scale up because we were being contacted by fishermen who were ready to donate fish. And we thought, okay, we better get our processing facilities and freezers off the ground, which we now have done because there is so much enthusiasm from organizations, both in the Bay and in the Yukon and beyond, from individuals wanting to get involved, from the fleet. We've been really honored to get to be a part of so many people coming together. It's clear that there is a lot of excitement for what we could build together. And we just hope to be kind of the connective tissue that makes that possible, that continues to make that possible with the good work that our tribes and other organizations are already doing.
Ourselves as individuals do a lot, but when we partner with others, we can do so much more for our communities. So I love talking about partnerships and fishermen who have reached out to you. I think that's really powerful. As we wrap up, if a community is struggling with a specific resource, say it's salmon or caribou, what is the first step to start working with you?
Well, we are just getting started and have a long way to go. And so we are always excited and enthusiastic to continue building relationships and building partnerships. And that, as opposed to kind of guaranteeing anything, what we can do is build together. What we can do is collaborate and expand. We have some really incredible partners across the state who are already establishing, kind of more localized food sharing networks as well. Native Conservancy has run a very successful traditional food sharing network throughout their region in Prince William Sound. And so we are continuously expanding and learning and trying to connect folks. What we really dream of is being able to incubate food hubs across Alaska using the technology that we have been trained in and are growing in Bristol Bay to empower communities to trade between themselves to be part of this growing network. And so we are enthusiastic to keep building with, all folks who are interested in co-creating what this becomes. And the best ways to, reach us are through our website, through social media, over email. And we are hoping that, in this next season, we'll continue expanding our partnerships and sharing more about what we're up to and how to get involved with specific events and efforts.
Yeah, our website is smokehousecollective.org, and our social media, I believe our Instagram is the Smokehouse Collective on Instagram, and then on Facebook, you can find us at the Smokehouse Collective for a group.
Oh, cool.
Be remiss to not say that we really want to be growing here in Dillingham and in Bristol Bay proper. That is. So it's so important to us that this community has true food sovereignty and has true food security. What does that look like here? And we ultimately can add our ideas, but we're not the only people that can make that decision. As we look towards the summer of 2025 and this fishing season, this harvest season, we're looking to bring in a few more people to work on our team, land steward position, and a few interns in order to grow this vision here in Dillingham proper.
I know you're expanding and you're making new relationships. So what's next for you?
We're very excited to be building up our home base in Dillingham, rather right outside Dillingham. We have successfully purchased some beautiful land where we hope to be kind of moving in our operations, getting our processing facility up and running and doing some build outs, in addition to continuing to partner in Dillingham to do some fishing this season and just kind of move at the pace of the fish, move at the pace of where we're at. Yeah, we've been blessed with such abundance very quickly that now we have the exciting moment of looking at everything and saying, okay, what's the right time right now? What's the next move right now? So we are really excited to be building our capacity to hopefully continue hosting more in the future.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to see all that you will be doing in Bristol Bay and beyond. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for having us.
Claudiana, for hosting this conversation as well on Mug Up. I love the idea of Mug Up as a kid who would go over, to the canneries in Naknek when we were set netting when I was little, and be able to have these, the crucial conversations, the connecting conversations that happen during mug up, and to be able to be supported in this way during our growth stages by our native corporation also means it means a lot, because again, with that question that we were talking about earlier, we are at such a crucial time right now, and the more collaboration that we can have between our tribes and nonprofit organizations and corporations really just shows our solidarity as a region and a people, and being able to grow our future together. Hodgdon.
Thank you again so much for being on the podcast. What a beautiful conversation of where you're going with the Smokehouse Collective, your passion and vision for Bristol Bay and even just communities beyond Bristol Bay, and your heart for traditional ways of life. And thank you to our audience for joining us. If you liked this podcast, go ahead and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you get your podcasts. And with that, we will see you in the next one.
We are one Bristol Bay. No matter the distance, we travel together. Our connections are bigger than place. They are traditions and memories. All of us moving forward together to create a path for the generations that follow. Bristol Bay Native Corporation, always more than a corporation.